It is a special edition of the Movie Junkie today because I am here, DB. I'm hanging out with my homie Torch. Torch, what's up, man? You doing cameras? You doing board work? You're multitasking a lot. Say what's up to the people.
Yes, sir. What's up, people?
Yes, sir. I'm also here with my homie Kalani. But the most important guest that I have with me today is someone that I am a big fan of, someone I was inspired by, influenced by, and is the first celebrity I ever met when I was a kid on the set of Mighty Ducks with my best friend, Aaron Schwartz. He is back. He is a citizen of Sway in the Morning. Please welcome him back to the show, Emilio Estevez.
Hey, thank you so much.
We're going to put some sound effects, applause, and stuff like that. Make it sound real bigger and everything like that. So last time you were here, we were talking a little bit off mic before we started the interview, and last time you were here was 2019, the day before The Public came out in theaters.
That's right.
The world has changed a lot since then.
Oh, man, has it.
Right, and so I was telling you that I was having a conversation with Aaron, who starred in the Mighty Ducks, and I started a podcast called The Dojdo with a friend of mine, Jason Rockman, and we were talking about Men at Work, which is a favorite film for both me and Jason and so many other people, and you were saying that the film is actually being re-released, just like this film that you're coming to promote as well.
Well, in a different way.
Right,
Men at Work is coming back in 4K, and so you can buy that DVD in the newly released 4K version, or you can go see The Way, which is back in theaters.
Yes.
Which is, again, as a director, as somebody who, again, independent filmmakers, when you make a film, and Men at Work was independent, Public was independent, this movie, The Way, is certainly independent. When you make the film and you turn it over to a studio, you hope that they're going to care for it. You hope that it's going to get out there in as many theaters as possible, and have as many eyeballs on it. And then it goes away, and you sort of give up a lot of your rights. This movie has not gone away. This movie has come back, and I guess it's a blessing on some levels, but it's also a heartbreak too, because it's like, okay, it's coming back, and people are saying, well, what happened? So now you have to tell the story of what happened and why it, sort of fell off the radar. And so it's great to have made movies that are getting reintroduced to people and are being rediscovered. But again, it's like, I'm getting older, man. I'm going to be 61 this week. It's just like, I want to be around to enjoy some of this, as opposed to having it part of the retrospective,
Yeah, I hear you. And that actually brings me to another point, because I was watching, I think it was Matt Damon on Hot Ones, the show with the wings and everything. And he said that the reason why so many smaller films and films that were, I guess, in the 80s and 90s, where Hollywood would take a chance on smaller, unknown, unproven, titles and that thing, is because of the DVD market shrunk. And so and that led to Hollywood just, I guess, basically wanting to do bigger movies, or movies that they felt were going to be successful without too much risk. Is that sort of true, or?
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. It's also, if you start looking through the what I call the carousel, the Apple movies, the movies that are coming out, and you're seeing big stars in movies you've never heard of. So what they do now, and what they've been doing actually for a while, but they do these things, it's called a foreign sales model, where they get a big star. The big star agrees to do the movie. They do it for 2 or 3 days. And then they surround that star with a bunch of other actors, many of whom you've never heard of, and then that movie gets made. And so that has kind of replaced the DVD. So again, you start channel surfing, you start going, and it's like, whoa, what's this guy doing in that movie? I never saw it. I never heard of it.
Yeah.
And that has been flooding the market for years. I'm of a mind that we need to take some of that money that's being spent on these terrible movies, because they're terrible. I think we would have agreement on
the bottom shelf of Blockbuster.
Yes, and there's a lot of people that would agree that Men at Work is terrible.
I disagree on that. Strongly disagree. That is an incredible film.
At the time, but this is a movie. Men at Work probably wouldn't get made nowadays. It probably wouldn't get made.
That is a good point, because I know that I feel like maybe later in your career you really started to hone in on really personal stories, and just The Public was an incredible film, and really touched on something serious, and not just let me just make a movie because I can, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so this film that you're coming to talk about today, The Way, which I was doing my research and reading all the trivia on IMDb and everything, and so the title is the English translation for the Camino de Santiago, which is this pilgrimage that in the film your father, Martin Sheen, takes to. I don't want to give too much away, but it is a very important journey that he does. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but your Martin's father, your grandfather, is also from Spain?
He is, yeah.
Okay, so when you guys were, during production, were there any moments that maybe made you kind of take notice of wow, I'm in Spain, let me connect with my roots and like
yeah.
the name that I get and everything like that. Did you have any of those moments?
Oh yeah, I mean this is a 1,000-year-old pilgrimage. So when you walk it, you're walking alongside the spirits of everybody who has come before you. And there was not a day that my grandfather Francisco Estevez was not top of mind. I felt him there. And so by the end, we got to the end of the journey. I said, when we got to Santiago, where the cathedral is and where the film ends, I said, I'm going to dedicate this movie to my grandfather, who never saw his name, on the screen. And so I did. And the very last frame of the film, it's dedicated to Francisco Estevez, who couldn't emigrate to the United States because there was a quota on Spaniards coming into this country. So he had to, when he left Spain as a boy, as a young man, he had to go to Cuba, became a Cuban national, and then was able to come into the United States as a Cuban, not as a Spaniard.
I've never heard of that.
Right? That's wacky.
Yeah.
Right? But so he comes into Cuba, lands in Miami, and he had dreams of opening a fruit stand. He wanted to sell fruit because in Galicia, a lot of people in the north, because they're so cut off, had to grow their own vegetables and their own fruit and make their own wine. So he brought all of that knowledge not only to Cuba but now to the United States, and that was his thing. He was like, I'm going to be basically a produce vendor. He got ripped off. Guy left him with nothing when he got to the States. So he heard they were hiring up in Dayton, Ohio, at NCR, National Cash Register. He got on a bus, went to Dayton and got a job and basically raised his whole family in Dayton. And then my mom was born in 1939. My dad's born in 1940 in Ohio. That's the beginning of the Ohio roots for me. And as a boy, we would go back. We were living in New York. We'd get evicted. And my dad would say, okay, we're getting on the bus and going out to Ohio because at least we can live with relatives there. And then my dad would come back to New York and, look for work. But so Ohio for me is... it's very formative years were spent in Ohio, and so it only made sense for me to pay tribute to my grandfather, which was the reason we were all here.
I definitely would not have made it in the 1930s. Like just what you described and what you had to go through and like just to get into the country by going through another country, that's, I would have just been like, I'm staying in Spain. Right. It's cool. Like, I'm good. But I also read that your father did a lot of his own stunts on this film.
Well, yeah, but they were all his idea. So on the film,
like the river scene, I heard was crazy.
So while I'm writing this thing, right, we're in California, and he would come over to the house and he'd say, hey, I got this great idea. I was like, okay, cool. He's like, yeah, the bag, it falls in the river. And I was like, okay, cool. All right. We can do that. I know how to make a movie because I know what it's going to take to get this 70-year-old man into a river of rapids, chasing after and swimming after his backpack. I knew what it took. But my dad, actors, unfortunately, oftentimes look at scripts and they go, my part. Anything that's not their part, they're like, that's BS, that's BS, that's BS. It's not. I'm not in that scene, so I don't care. My dad obviously had a much more active role in this, but he was also kind of pushing the whole action star thing. He's like, I'm going to get in that river, I'm going to swim. It's like, okay. But on the day, he looked down at the water, he looked at the rapids, and he's like, oh man, whose idea was this? I just looked at him and I just shook my head. I was like, dude,
You asked for this.
You asked for this.
You wanted it, you got it. There's something I want to ask about, and then we'll get back to the way. But because you were talking about people who want to do action and big, heavy roles in their later years, Mission Impossible. I never agreed with what they did with your character in that film. Like, it was just like, you should have been in the movie the whole time. So, I mean, like, do you have any other aspirations of doing action? And, like, you see a lot of these older actors who are doing, John Wick and Mission Impossible again and stuff like that. So, do you have, or are you cool with where you are right now?
I mean, Tom is his own he does his thing, and it's extraordinary. And I watch that, and I marvel, and my mouth is hanging open at some of the things that he's doing in those Mission Impossible franchise films, and it just blows my mind. And so I have such deep and mad respect for him for what he's doing. The older you get, we know the knees start to go, the elbows go, the hands get stiff. But for me, sure. I mean, we got to talk about this because we talked about it off air. The last time I was here, we talked about I'm not doing any many Mighty Ducks and Young Guns never going to happen. Well, what happened with Mighty Ducks, and we're talking about now the reboot of Young Guns. So that will, yes, require me to be riding that horse, jumping off the horse, shooting, rolling, flying through the air, doing all that stuff. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is we're not sure when that is going to come to fruition, but we're talking.
Yeah, I wanted to set that up so that you had the chance to either talk about it or not. So at least
and I appreciate that. But but again, I did want to come correct on all of that and just be like, dude, the last time I was here, I said not doing it, don't have anything to, and then here we are. So.
It's all good. We cleared that up. So
we had to. Again, I
appreciate it, man.
No, it's like I've been just feeling mad guilt about it too. I was just like, I have to make a special trip and get back in that studio and talk to you guys about it. I was like, I felt like such a liar.
You're like, I don't go to the reunions or none of that. Meanwhile, no, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. Working with your father, directing your father, writing something for your father. Obviously, if he were to walk in now, I would lose my mind. But to you, it's dad. So is there anybody that you've worked with that maybe, because you kind of grew up in the industry, but like I'm here excited to talk to you because I've watched you my entire life. Was there anybody that you either worked with alongside as an actor or maybe wrote something for that you were like, I can't believe I'm having this opportunity right now?
Well, I don't know how well you remember the cast on Bobby. Film that I wrote and directed.
Let me stop you real quick. Okay. So our intern Kalani here, I was like, Emilio Estevez is coming today, and so he had a question about Bobby. So I want to give him the opportunity to get this off.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
How you doing, Mr. Estevez?
Well, it's Emilio, please.
So I seen that you wrote and directed the film Bobby, and it said that it took you 6 years to do that, and I just wanted to know, like, how trying was that for you, and like, were you ever questioning yourself through the process?
Oh, every day working on that, working on the script. It actually took me 7 years to finally find somebody to say, yes, I love this and we're going to help you get this made. And then the actors came aboard and they, started with Anthony Hopkins and then Bill Macy and then Sharon Stone. And then all of a sudden these actors were validating the work that I had done on the script. And that had taken so long to get made, and it was an amazing moment in time for me as an actor, as a filmmaker, to have that kind of validation from all these extraordinary actors. But yes, there were moments where I thought, "What am I doing? This film is costing me a fortune. I'm saying no to other things that I should be saying yes to, but I can't because I really got to get this picture made." And it was, we were. I think the country was going through certainly not what we're going through now, but there was a lot of divide going on, and I thought that the country needed to be reminded of the voice of Robert Kennedy because when he was killed, it was sort of the end of hope, and I thought that we were in the middle of it was after 9/11, and again we were so divided. I thought this is an important movie at this time, and it should get done, and then. We just lost Harry Belafonte, who was part of the cast. And, so you talk about a movie set. And to go back to your question about, you walked on that set, and it's like, there's Anthony Hopkins, there's Harry Belafonte, there's Sharon Stone, there's Demi. Shia LaBeouf said to me, who's on the film as well, he said, man, I don't even know where to look. So I tucked into him, and I was like, I don't either. It was just like, it was just deep. And, with Belafonte, he walked on the set and you knew he was there without even seeing him. There was just that grace and love and respect that everybody had for him on the set. And because of his deep roots to the civil rights movement, his involvement with the film was, and he knew Bobby Kennedy personally, was a great friend of Bobby's. It was a moment for me to be wildly starstruck, not just by Harry Belafonte, the performer, but the man, the legend, and also what he embodied his whole life.
Man, thank you for telling us that because I never got to meet Mr. Belafonte personally, but like just to know that he was a good guy and just like the presence that he brought to this film, Bobby, is just like that is incredible to hear.
And Nick Cannon was on the film too, and Nick was like, his grandmother said, if Mr. Belafonte is on set, she said, Nick, you spend time with that man. So during the lunch hour, whenever Nick was not on set working, he would go and spend time with Harry, and he was just like getting that nourishment, getting that food, and so when we wrapped, Nick was just like, I thank you. And he says, I don't care where this movie goes, I don't care who sees it, or he says, that was so special for me, and so important. So.
That's an awesome story, and it makes me want to ask you more about just like the process of making films, because it can go so many different directions. And with this film, the way I read that it was really kind of guerrilla tactics filming. I mean, it wasn't like, the big bells and whistles with the big budget and we can spend as much as we want and everything. No. So what would you say were some of the biggest challenges? Because we have a lot of people who listen who want to make movies and produce, direct, and write and everything like that. So what would you say in terms of this film being smaller and not having the money for marketing, promotion, and advertising? What were the challenges as far as like, we need to get this done however possible?
I would say to any aspiring filmmaker, think epically. Because you're living an epic life. Whether you think it's epic or not, you're living in your own movie, and your life movie is epic. So so in terms of that, my approach to making this film, even though we shot it on Super 16, I saw this as an epic emotional journey. And so every frame is informed by that, mode where I thought the story was big enough to warrant, first of all, making a movie about, and then I've got Martin Sheen's face, which you're this tight on him, and he says so much by not saying a word, and so we tucked into that, and we tucked into his grief, and for me, we were scrappy. But we had great ambition, and we also knew that we were making this movie that the Spaniards basically said, what do you Americans know about this pilgrimage? This pilgrimage belongs to us. This is a national treasure. And I said, well, why didn't you make a movie about it then? Why haven't you made? We're here. We're going to do this. And we were kind of dismissed by them on a lot of levels. And now some of those areas that were skeptical about us filming there's plaques everywhere saying the way filmed here, the way stayed here. This is the hotel where Martin Sheen stayed. It had this lasting impact, and I think now, for just filmmaking aside, the movie has more resonance now coming out of COVID than it did when it first was released. I was talking to a journalist last week who lost 22 members of his family from COVID. And so now this film, we're 3 years out from the start of the pandemic. People are just starting to figure out how to grieve or not. And I think that has a lot to do with sort of why the movie has touched so many people now, and more people now than when it was initially released. It's just we're still going through this grieving process. We have to. We have to grieve.
It is necessary.
We have to get not get past it, but we have to allow ourselves that moment to grieve. And what better way to do that than on a 40-day walk? Yeah. And not everyone can afford to go to Spain and travel and do this or take the time off, take those 40 days. But a pilgrimage can be a walk around Central Park. A pilgrimage can be to your mailbox if you are, if you have difficulty walking. A pilgrimage can be to go and have dinner with your neighbor who you may not have. Pilgrimage is it's about community, and it's about finding that community, whether it's in church or whether it's in some other way, because I think we need it, we crave it. And most of the movies that I do, I am inspired by community, whether it's Bobby, where you have this hotel setting, you have all of these disparate people and different characters, all all living together and under the same roof. The way is again about community. The public is about community. Mm-hmm. So I, as a filmmaker, I love actors, first of all. They drive me crazy, but I love them.
Right.
And I love telling ensemble stories. I love multiple storylines, and I love the idea of, I just love being in that process, where you're in a situation where, you're working with extraordinary actors and you just let the camera go, and you let them live in the quiet, and you let them, and you trust. I think that has a lot to do with my process too is hiring actors that I trust.
True. I was thinking about why you were talking about now about community and things like that, about also fatherhood, because I grew up raised by a single mother. I don't have any siblings. So that's why film was so important to me, because I would look at movies and I would be like, wow, how cool would it be if my family was like that? You know, like Ferris Bueller is my all-time favorite movie. I mean, I have Say Ferris tattooed right here. John Hughes is like, you know, the master of his craft, in my opinion. And I was wondering if maybe like fatherhood, being in the spotlight, can give you a different perspective on like, okay, I have to protect my child because of the press wants to see them and that sort of thing. And also maybe, I don't know if you ever watched film growing up and were like, like there's families that I would love to be in that family. Or it's like, was there any, or maybe like a father that gave you an example, like that's a good father, you know? Like for me, it was James Avery in The Fresh Prince, who played Uncle Phil. I always just really thought he was not only a great character, not only an amazing actor, but just the way he presented himself on that series and on that show was just like very commendable and something that I wanted to aspire to be if I ever decide to have children. Was there anything or any characters like that that inspired you in terms of like how you wanted to be a parent and carry on yourself in your personal life?
Well, I became a parent very, very young.
Okay.
I was 22 years old. I just turned 22 when my son was born. So I kind of grew up with my kids. My daughter she's 37 now. My son's going to be 39 in June. So it's like as a father, I rarely saw instances where my life was depicted on screen, sort of a young dad trying to raise these two kids and growing up together and figuring out. It was like, I just learned how to tie my shoes, and I was like, "You're what?" You know what I mean? We're having a kid? What? It was for me. Yes, I was focused on protecting my kids from the industry, from the spotlight. But again, I was still trying to figure out so much of my own stuff and going through my own stuff that. It was it was interesting times because again you need to work because you need to support
your family.
You need to
pay bills.
On this one hand, and the other hand, it's like okay, working also takes you away from your family. So one of the things that I thought was so beautiful growing up was that my dad insisted that we travel. We travel with him.
My mother too.
So if he
took a trip every year.
I mean, but ours was for work, so he always got the company to pay for it, which is amazing. So if we went to Mexico, which we did when we left New York in 1969, my dad was like, "Family's coming with me." Boom. So we lived in Mexico for 4 months. We're going to Rome. Family's coming with me. We're going to the Philippines. Family's coming with me. So we had this immersive travel experience growing up, where we were dug into a community, dug into a town, a city, a village.
Learning about cultures and everything.
And learning languages, learning different cultures, learning languages. Basically so immersed that, we talk about being in Mexico. My mom would cook a pot roast every night. And the neighborhood kids would join us. Kids I was going to school with. I was put into a Spanish language school because I was in the first grade. So I'm 6 years old. They put me in school. Nobody speaks English. I'm like, okay. And then a couple of nights after, I made friends, and so those kids would join me for dinner, and then their parents would come. And then other kids would come, and then other parents would come. So there would be evenings where we would have 20 people eating mom's pot roast.
Which is normal,
right? Right? But and nobody spoke Spanish, and none of them spoke English, and yet we found that community. We found that common bond, eating mom's pot roast, sitting across the table from each other, because that's what family, that's what community is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you see these travel shows where people go around and learning cultural normatives and like other sort of traditions and things like that, and it gives you a better sense of just like what life is like outside of your surroundings.
That's right.
And it helps to, and I've told people this, it's just like when you travel, it doesn't have to be the most, far away land or whatever. It could just be, someplace that's near to you and just seeing how people live in the next state over. Even,
that's right. That's right.
And you can still learn something and it can add to your personality and who you are as a human being.
That's right. And to your point, you don't have to travel overseas. I've got 320,000 miles on my Lexus, it's a 2006 Lexus. I drive everywhere. I didn't drive to New York for this trip, but I do.
The Lexus is outside.
Right? But I drive everywhere. So once you get outside of the 212 and the 310, you see how other people are living across this country. And I'll dig in. Even here, I've lived in Atlanta for 6 months. I lived in the Twin Cities for 6 months. I lived in New Mexico for 6 months. That seems to be sort of the norm, that 6-month period of time where you dig in and you get to know people from outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah. So I have a question because, like I said earlier, we do have a lot of people who listen to the show, want to write, direct, star, and everything. And so what do you do to get out of a creative block?
Oh, man. Gardening.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that a hobby you picked up recently, or did you
No,
always?
this is something I came to late in life, but getting out in the garden, getting your hands, I think the Mennonites have a saying is like the closer, the more you have your hands in the dirt, the closer you are to God. And so I sort of took that literally, and I was like, okay, I need some inspiration, and I would start gardening and planting food, and all edibles, all edible food.
Right, yeah.
Just to be clear.
Yeah, I looked over at the reps like, we can change that everyone.
Yes.
Right.
I actually did grow some of those too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that I got such inspiration. The miracle of putting a seed in the ground and watching it grow and become something that is ultimately consumed, isn't that like writing a screenplay?
Yeah.
You look at that blank page in the same way you look at that piece of earth that has nothing growing in it at the time, and you put that seed in, and what's weird is like I know that the seed is going to grow, and yet every time it comes up, it's like I'm like a 6-year-old. I'm just
seeing that little bit of green.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Every artist, you're looking at the blank canvas, you're looking at the blank page. When you start Once Upon a Time or Fade In, you take that leap of faith, and it's terrifying because once you start, you've made a commitment to yourself to finish. For me, anyway, and I think that most people feel that way. I talk to artists and writers. Yeah, I'm working on this book. I've been on it for 10 years. It's like, I get it, but you gotta take that leap. You gotta finally finish it. You have to have closure on that so you can move on to the next. And that is the most terrifying thing for me, that fade in, that Once Upon a Time, because you are committing to take that journey yourself. And when you do, you know that you have a commitment to finish it. And that was to go back to Bobby, 7 years. And there was a minute where I was struggling I had 30 pages, and I was really struggling with the writing of that. And for almost a year, I had the same 30 pages. I was carried around and like, got this 30 pages, and I think my parents were worried that I was having that overlooked moment with Jack Nicholson, all work and no
sitting at the typewriter the whole time.
Thing. It was just like it was that. And so they sent Charlie over to check in on me, and Charlie says, "Hey, bro, can I read that 30 pages, that phantom 30 pages?" So I said, "Yeah, of course." I give him the 30 pages. He reads it. He says, "You need to get out of your situation. You need to get out of this house and go somewhere that you're going to find inspiration, because it's not happening here." He says, "Just get in your car and drive." So the next day I did. Started driving up the California coast. Started getting dark. I had no reservations, no real plan. Pulled into this motel in a town called Pismo Beach, and checked in. And the gal at the behind the checkout or behind the registration desk, she says, "Well, hey, I recognize you. What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm doing a retreat." I didn't want to tell her too much.
Yeah.
And then she says, "Well, is it something super secret?" I said, "Well, I'm writing a movie about the day Bobby Kennedy was shot." And her eyes started to well up, and she almost fell over, and she says, "I was there."
You picked the
True
one
story.
place, and you just happened to find this woman who was there.
It was madness. You couldn't. If I had written that
wouldn't
would have been
believe
it would have been a rejected plot line. You
Yeah.
just went, dude, come on, this is
serious.
just too fantastical. Her name was Diane. She had married a couple of boys to keep them from going to Vietnam. She was knocking on doors and canvassing for Bobby Kennedy, and she was in the Ambassador Ballroom when the night he was shot. And she became the character that Lindsay Lohan ultimately played in the movie. So while I stayed there for almost a month, interviewing her about her, what she felt and how she, what she felt we lost that night, and sort of, getting as much information from her as I could. And but yeah, she became that character ultimately, embodiment of the character in the film. So you never know where the inspiration comes from. A seed comes from a stranger you meet, but pay attention because those are the moments that you can miss if you're not open to it. And it's like a closed fist. Nothing gets in a closed fist, but if you open your hands, everything can come to you. Man, as an artist.
Dropping bars today, man. There is one last thing I want to ask you about, because I was watching Breakfast Club the other day, and for some reason, this scene maybe just never stuck out to me, but because of everything that we've been witnessing happening, with the mass shootings and everything like that, and there was the scene in the Breakfast Club where Anthony Michael Hall, who plays Brian, reveals that he's in detention because he was having suicidal thoughts, and then he brought a gun and he was sent. But then it's only a little bit afterward that you find out that it was a starter pistol,
right?
Which lightens the moment a little bit, and then you guys are allowed to move on. I just wanted to know, because obviously we lost John Hughes a few years ago, but you being there, part of the cast, what was going through your mind that day during that specific scene? Was it any? I know it was the 80s. I mean, it was you shot in 84, and it came out in 85. So around that time, I mean, I was super young, but I don't feel like school shootings and that sort of thing were so serious. It was just kind of like, we can, laugh this off. Oh, you brought a starter pistol. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what it was like filming that scene.
Well, any day on that set was a surprise. It was like doing a play every day, and we would just take a part of that play and we'd shoot that. We rehearsed for weeks. So by the time it came to shoot, we were a pretty well-oiled machine. And it's interesting talking about bringing the starter pistol to school and how benign it seemed, and yet now, to your point, that would be the least of our worries.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what was going through John's mind at that time to write that in, because it was almost like you could have left it out and the movie would still be amazing.
That's right.
So just watching that, I was like, wait a minute, I almost forgot about it, but just seeing that now, I was like, I figured I have to ask somebody who was there.
Well, no, and I wonder if it was something that John had experienced, if a classmate had actually brought a gun to school or a starter's pistol to school. But, I thought it was a pretty clever way to have him have that, the nerd with
of all
Michael.
people.
Yeah, exactly.
And not Judd or right. Yeah, amazing. And also for anybody listening, quick bit of trivia: you guys filmed Ferris Bueller and Breakfast Club at the same high school?
I believe yes. I think they did. I wasn't in Ferris, but
right.
But I almost.
But your brother was.
I was almost in Ferris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Charlie made it.
Yeah, Charlie made it.
The degenerate.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you so much for being here with us, Mr. Estevez. And I mean, listen, everybody, The Way will be in theaters Tuesday, May 16th. Go see it. Go buy it on Blu-ray, DVD, 4K, Steelbook, box set, whatever, when it comes out. So I just want to thank you again for coming back, being a part of the show again, clearing up the Mighty Ducks confusion.
Dude, and the Young Guns confusion. And I promise, you know what, I will never make that mistake again. And I should have just called in.
Hey,
I should have just called in and said, I'm so sorry.
Guys, I couldn't say anything then, but I can say it now.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing this film. This is an amazing film. Please go see it again. It's called The Way, out May 16th.